The lunch rush came in waves, like weather you learned to read by the sound of the door. When the bell rang sharp and quick, Lena knew it was a hurried office crowd. When it chimed slow and heavy, it was tourists with time to spare. That afternoon the bell sounded once, deliberate, and she looked up from the coffee station to see a man step inside as if the room had rearranged itself to make space for him. He wore a simple charcoal coat, no logo, no flash, the kind of clothes that cost more because they didn't need to say so. He paused just long enough to take in the place. The vinyl booths with their small tiers, the chalkboard menus smudged by erasers, the window that caught the sun and made the dust dance. And then he chose the back booth by the radiator, alone. Lena wiped her hands on her apron, smoothed a strand of hair back into her ponytail, and picked up a menu she wouldn't need. She'd been a waitress long enough to know that some rituals were for the customer, not the server. "Afternoon," she said, setting down the water. "I'm Lena, take your time." He smiled politely, the way people did when they had practiced smiling for photographs. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was calm, measured, with the kind of ease that came from never having to rush. He ordered the grilled cheese and tomato soup, asked for the soup extra hot, and folded his menu into a neat rectangle before placing it at the edge of the table. When she walked away, she felt his eyes on her for a second, not in the way that made her uncomfortable, but as if he were trying to memorize the room and everyone in it. Lena's shift had started early. Mornings were for oatmeal spills and sticky fingers, for the rush of parents who needed coffee more than kindness. She was a single mom, 28, with a 5-year-old named Mateo who loved dinosaurs and counted the cracks in the sidewalk on the way to school. Rent was due in 9 days. The car made a sound like it was clearing its throat before starting. She had done the math on her tips 3 times already and decided not to do it again. Math, she had learned, could make you hopeful and then cruel. The man ate slowly. He dipped the sandwich into the soup, wiped his mouth with the napkin, and drank his water in careful sips. When she refilled his cup, he thanked her again. When she brought the check, he asked if she had time to answer a question. "Depends on the question," she said with a half smile. "Do you like working here?" he asked. She considered the truth, the whole truth, and the version that fit into a moment. "I like the people," she said, "and the hours work for me." He nodded as if she'd confirmed something he suspected. He slid the check toward himself, pulled out a black card without ceremony, and placed it on the tray. Lena picked it up and took it to the register, the machine humming as it swallowed the card and spit out a receipt. She tore it cleanly, tucked the merchant copy away, and returned with the customer copy and a pen. When she came back to clear the table later, the booth was empty. The plate sat centered, crumbs pushed into a neat line at the edge, the spoon resting inside the bowl like a sleeping thing. On the check, the tip line was filled in with a firm 0. Jorsarn, the total circled once decisively. For a moment, Lena felt the familiar sting, the small hot pulse behind the eyes that she had learned to swallow. She told herself it was fine. Some people didn't tip. Some people believed the myth that tips were optional gratitude instead of rent. Groceries, shoes for a growing kid. She picked up the plate and the bowl, stacked them, and slid the receipt into her apron pocket without looking again. At the dish station, as she tilted the plate to scrape it into the bin, something fluttered and landed on the counter, a folded piece of paper, thick and heavy. Not a receipt, not a napkin. She froze, heart thudding, and then unfolded it with fingers that suddenly felt too big. It was a handwritten note on cream-colored paper, the kind that came from a personal stationery set. The handwriting was careful, almost old-fashioned. "Kindness isn't loud," it read. "Sometimes it hides where only the patient will find it." Below the note was an address, a time, and a signature that made her inhale sharply. She knew the name. Everyone did. It belonged to a man whose face appeared on magazine covers next to words like visionary and ruthless and philanthropist in turns, a billionaire. He had left a 0 tip on the table and something else under the plate. Lena folded the note back up and pressed it flat with her palm. Her mind raced ahead of her body, building and discarding explanations. It could be a prank. It could be a mistake. It could be a test, and she had failed by feeling hurt before she'd finished clearing the table. She tucked the note into her apron and finished her shift on autopilot, refilling coffee, smiling at regulars, listening to a story about a grandson who had learned to ride a bike. When the bell rang at the end of the day and the door closed behind the last customer, she leaned against the counter and breathed. At home, Mateo was already asleep on the couch, his dinosaur book open on his chest. She carried him to bed, brushed the crumbs from his cheek, and stood for a moment watching the rise and fall of his breath. In the quiet of the kitchen, she unfolded the note again. The address was downtown, a building she'd passed on the bus and never entered. The time was tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. The signature was real, looping, and confident. She didn't sleep much that night. She thought about the 0 on the receipt, about the man's careful eating and polite smile. She thought about the word kindness and how it had felt like a challenge. At dawn, she left Mateo with her neighbor, put on the cleanest dress she owned, and took the bus downtown, the city waking up around her in a blur of windows and light. The building was taller than it looked from the street, all glass and quiet, the kind of place where sound seemed to get absorbed by money. The lobby smelled like lemons and something metallic. A receptionist with perfect posture checked her name off a list, without surprise, and handed her a visitor badge. "He's expecting you," she said, as if people like Lena were expected all the time. The elevator ride was smooth and fast. When the doors opened, the office was simple, almost bare, with a long table and a wall of windows that turned the city into a map. The man from the diner stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He turned when he heard her, and his smile this time was warmer, less practiced. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I should," Lena replied, her voice steady despite the way her hands wanted to shake. "You left no tip." "I did," he said gently, "just not on the table." He gestured for her to sit. He poured water from a carafe into 2 glasses and slid one toward her. "I grew up watching my mother work in restaurants," he said. "She taught me that what people do when they think no one is watching tells you who they are. I wanted to see if you would clear the table with care anyway, if you would notice what was hidden." Lena bristled. "So it was a test?" "In a way," he said, "but not the way you think. You see, most people look for money. They flip the receipt, count the bills. They miss the other things." He opened a folder and pushed it across the table. Inside were photographs of the diner taken from the street, from the corner, from the back. Notes in the margin described the chipped paint, the broken booth, the ancient refrigerator. "I'm starting a fund," he said. "Small, local. For places like that. For people like your boss. For servers who need predictable income and schedules that work for families. I needed someone to help me see it from the inside." Lena stared at the folder. "You could hire consultants," she said. "Experts." "I could," he agreed. "But experts often forget what it feels, like to count cracks in the sidewalk. With a child because the bus is late, they forget what a 0 can do to a day." He slid another paper toward her. It was a contract, short and clear. A salary that made her breath catch. Benefits. Hours that ended in time to pick up. "Mateo, this isn't charity," he said. "It's work. You'd help design programs, talk to owners, listen to staff. You'd tell me when I'm wrong." "And the tip?" she asked. He smiled. "The tip was under the plate because I wanted you to find it yourself. Because kindness, when it's loud, can become a performance. When it's quiet, it can change the structure." Lena thought of the diner, of the way the sun hit the window just right in the afternoon. She thought of Mateo's shoes, too small already. She thought of the 0 in the note, of the patience it had taken not to throw the plate down. She signed the contract with a pen he offered, the ink smooth and sure. When she left the building, the city felt different. Not kinder exactly, more possible. She took the bus back to the diner, walked in, and looked at the booth by the radiator. She smiled, picked up a menu she didn't need, and began to plan. Months later, the diner had new booths and a refrigerator that hummed like a promise. Servers had schedules posted 2 weeks in advance. Tips were still unpredictable, but paychecks weren't. On a busy afternoon, a man in a charcoal coat came in and ordered grilled cheese and tomato soup. Extra hot. Lena brought his water, smiled, and set the plate down with care. Under it this time was nothing hidden. Just a meal shared honestly, and a kindness that had learned how to speak without saying a word.